Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Today I bring you Mr. Deer by Scaredy Cat666. This story took place when I was a kid. We lived in a small house in the suburbs. My parents, my big brother Jack, and I. We were difficult kids, I suppose. We would get into fights or skip school quite often, which drove our parents insane. One time I broke Jack's Game Boy. He got so angry he hit me in the head with a baseball bat. He was grounded for over a month, and I still have a small scar over my left eyebrow. Apart from stories like that, we were pretty close. My brother and I, Jack, would always defend me against bullies and help me out with my homework. Our family life wasn't perfect, but we loved each other, and that's what counts. Anyway, when we were about 8 and 12 years old, my brother and I both were plagued by terrible nightmares. We'd often wake up at the same time, drenched in sweat. Most of the time we couldn't remember what was so scary. But when we did, we were terrified to find out how similar our dreams were. The details were different, but they almost always featured some kind of dark entity, like a shadow that was creeping around the house, watching us sleep, waiting for something. Sometimes we could even see his face. It wasn't actually a face, more like a skull of a deer. Also, in some dreams, he had antlers. That's why we started to call him Mr. Deer. We told our parents about him, but they just shrugged it off and said something along the lines that we were probably seeing the same horror movie. The dreams got more frequent and the creature came closer every time. It got so bad that sometimes I started crying when we were supposed to go to bed, but Jack always calmed me down, saying that he'd protect me and that they were just dreams. One night, however, there was no nightmare. I slept like a baby. I think I even dreamt of something nice this time. I got up feeling relaxed and happy, bearing a little hope that the nightmares had stopped for good. I dressed and went downstairs for breakfast. As I entered the kitchen, my heart stopped. There, at the far end of the table, sat Mr. Deer. I couldn't believe my eyes, but there he was, complete with a deer skull, face, and antlers. His shadowy figure had a blurry outline that was always shifting. He was made out of black smoke, just like in the dreams. Next to Mr. Deer sat my brother Jack. He was quiet and had tears in his eyes. Across from Jack sat my father, his face contorted into the most forced, tense smile I'd ever seen. My mother stood next to the stove, smiling that same terrible smile, with her eyes ripped wide open. "Oh, good morning, Sam," she said in a grotesque, friendly tone. Her voice was shaking. I panicked and wanted to run, but my mother put a hand on my shoulder. Now, don't be rude to our guest. Be a good boy and sit down." I looked at her. Behind that terrible smile, I can see that she was extremely scared. Her eyes were watering up. It looked like she was made to smile like that by some unseen force. I looked at my brother. He nodded, so I sat down. I looked at Mr. Deer. He just sat there. His breathing was slow, deep, and heavy. It sent shivers through my body. I think I've never been so scared in my whole life. My brother looked at me, and even though he must have been terrified, he tried to put on a tough face. "There you are, Mr. Deer. I hope you like my cooking," my mother said as she put a plate in front of Mr. Deer. I was shocked to see that there on the plate lay our dog, Rusty, motionless. I started to cry silently. Mr. Deer lifted Rusty off the plate and opened his mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Jack looked away, and my mother covered my eyes with her hand. I could hear the terrible sound of cracking bones, flesh being torn, and blood spurting. When Mr. Deer was finished with his meal, my mother asked, "Well, did you like it? Was it okay?" Mr. Deer took a deep breath, and with an unnaturally deep voice, he said, "I am not yet satisfied." What more could you want?" my mother asked. "I want the children," my father said nervously. Now, wait a minute. That was not in the agreement. You just can't." Mr. Deer lifted his hand, and all of a sudden, Mom and Dad froze. Their movements stopped completely. My dad was half standing up with his mouth still open, like someone pressed stop on a remote. Mr. Deer rose from his chair and walked over to us, right through the table, just right through it, like a ghost. My brother and I screamed, and we jumped up. We ran for the front door, but it was locked. We wanted to get the key, but Mr. Deer already stood in the hallway. So we chose the only option left and ran up the stairs. I ran to my room and locked the door. In panic, I cried and screamed, but my brother held me tight, telling me to calm down. "It's going to be okay. Trust me." We could hear Mr. Deer's heavy breathing coming closer. Suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. We were sitting on my bed holding each other. Then a black smoke-like substance started coming through the keyhole with a hissing sound. It pooled on the floor, building up to a form. "He's coming! What do we do?" I yelled. My brother reached behind me and opened up the window. In my panic, I hadn't even thought about that. He looked me in the eyes and said, "When you get down, promise me one thing." "What?" I asked. "Run." And with that, he pushed me out of the window. I fell pretty deep and landed in a thorny bush. Jack closed the window behind me. "Jack!" I yelled. Then I heard Jack scream. The same noises from before started again, and gushes of blood painted the inside of the window. "Jack!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. No answer. I didn't want to, but I kept my promise and started running out of our yard, down the road, hysterically crying for help. Then suddenly, I woke up. It took me a minute, but I realized it was all just a dream. I sighed deeply with relief. I went downstairs to get some breakfast. I entered the kitchen hesitantly. There were my parents sitting at the table like always, and everything seemed normal. "Mom, Dad, I had a terrible dream again. Where's Jack? I want to tell him too." "Who's Jack?" my dad asked. I looked at my dad in disbelief, but he looked dead serious. "What do you mean? Jack, my brother." My parents looked at each other confusedly. I thought this was a joke, but my parents both claimed that they didn't know who Jack was. I ran up to Jack's room. It was an office now. All his things were gone. "Jack, where is he?" My parents didn't know what I was talking about. I ran around the house, frantically searching for something, anything. But no matter how hard I tried, I found nothing at all to prove Jack ever even existed. He didn't show up in any family pictures. The marks on the door frame that showed his growth next to mine had vanished. Also, our dog Rusty was nowhere to be found, and his bowl and basket were gone too. What the hell was going on? My parents got a little worried. They told me that it was probably all just part of the dream, that I have always been an only child and that we've never had a dog. I screamed and cried. I threw one of the worst tantrums ever. I didn't stop for days. So my parents sent me to a child psychologist. He said it was probably a form of child psychosis, so I got some psychotherapy and medication. After a while, I realized that Jack was gone and that there was nothing I could do. I calmed down and eventually stopped talking about him. I never saw Jack, Rusty, or Mr. Deer again. As I grew older, life threw me new problems. I got tired, and I started saying to myself that maybe it was really all just a dream, just a weird false memory that my mind clings to for some reason. But sometimes when I'm alone for too long, I get all fired up again. It all seemed so real. I remember how I grew up with Jack, how we played and walked to school together, how we told each other scary stories at night. And how the hell did I get this scar that I see every morning I look in the mirror? My parents claim that they don't know where it came from. How do you forget how your child got a scar on his face? Jack, where are you? I miss you. So quoth this raven. Thank you all for coming to visit. It means so much to me. My little chateau is always open to you, my darlings. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, and Tabby Cat. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.